Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The United Kingdom, France and Germany have vowed to continue the UN sanctions relief for Iran beyond the September 20th deadline. In a letter to the UN Security Council, the European countries opposed the deadline set by the US to reimpose sanctions on Iran. Washington initiated snapback protocol to reinstate the embargoes on Tehran back in August. President Donald Trump says the US is dealing very well with tough and smart Taliban. At a White House news conference, Trump said the Taliban are very sharp, but even they are tired of 19-year-long fighting. He said Washington is having very good discussions with the group's representatives on the Afghan peace process. The United States military says it is stepping up troops' presence in northeastern Syria amid escalating regional tensions with Russia. In a statement, a U.S. military spokesperson said the Central Command deployed equipment to augment U.S. troops in the region. He stressed the measures will ensure the safety of coalition forces, saying Washington does not see conflict with any other nation in Syria. Beijing has issued rules on its proposed list of unreliable entities, saying it will target foreign firms and individuals endangering China's sovereignty and security. The Commerce Ministry said the list will help protect the legitimate rights and interests of the Chinese expatriates and individuals. The ministry said it resolutely opposes the U.S. decision to ban WeChat and video sharing app TikTok from the U.S. app stores starting Sunday night. India has reported the world's highest 1,247 COVID-19 deaths, taking the toll to over 85,000 and with infections tally crossing 5.3 million. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered 858 deaths and nearly 40,000 cases in a day. In Pakistan, 7 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, bringing the count to 6,415 with more than 305,000 infections. Globally, the virus has claimed over 950,000 lives and infected more than 30 million people so far. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The United Kingdom, France and Germany have vowed to continue the UN sanctions relief for Iran beyond the September 20th deadline. In a letter to the UN Security Council, the European countries opposed the deadline set by the US to reimpose sanctions on Iran. The UN envoy for European trio said any move by Washington to reinstate the sanctions on Tehran would be illegal. The envoy said they have worked tirelessly to preserve the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran, which also includes Russia and China. They added Europe is fully determined to uphold the UN Security Council resolutions encompassing the deal. Earlier, Washington formally notified the UN of its demand to restore sanctions on Tehran, citing violations of the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Washington initiated snapback protocol to reinstate the embargoes on Tehran back in August. Now, President Donald Trump says the U.S. is dealing very well with tough and smart Taliban. At a news conference, Trump said the Taliban are very sharp, but even they are tired of the 19-year-long fighting. The U.S. president said Washington is having very good discussions with the group's representatives on the Afghan peace process. It said the number of US forces in Afghanistan will be less than 4,000 in the near future. Trump said the US will be out of Afghanistan because certain things have to be fulfilled, saying 19 years is a long time. The US president's statement comes amid ongoing intra-Afghan talks in Doha. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council says it strongly encourages Afghan parties to peace negotiations to continue pursuing confidence building. Now, in a statement, the Security Council welcomed the start of the intra-Afghan talks in Doha. It urged the two sides to put efforts into reductions in violence and continue to engage in good faith. The Council said it strongly reaffirms its commitments to the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the Taliban say China has assured its support and assistance for peace in Afghanistan. In a tweet, spokesperson Dr. Muhammad Naeem said a Taliban delegation headed by Mullah Brother Ahund met with Chinese Special Envoy for Afghanistan Liu Jian in Doha. The US military is stepping up its troops' presence in northeastern Syria amid escalating regional tensions with Russia. In a statement, a US military spokesperson said the Central Command deployed equipment to augment US forces in the region. It stressed the measures will ensure the safety of the coalition forces, saying Washington does not seek conflict with any other nation in Syria. The development comes after a rising number of attacks by ISIS in the region, which sparked concerns that terrorist groups is re-emerging. Earlier, President Donald Trump told reporters at the White House that the United States is out of Syria and remaining forces are there just to guard the oil reserves. Now, Beijing has issued rules on its proposed list of unreliable entities, saying it will target foreign firms and individuals endangering China's sovereignty and security. The Commerce Ministry said the list will help protect the legitimate rights and interests of the Chinese enterprises and individuals. The ministry said it resolutely opposes the U.S. decision to ban WeChat and video sharing app TikTok from U.S. app stores starting Sunday night. Earlier, the United States Commerce Department said the new measures will bar citizens from downloading the apps through any app store in the United States. Now, TikTok is currently in talks to be acquired by the American software maker Oracle. If a planned partnership is agreed and approved by President Trump, the app would not be banned. Moving on now, India has reported the world's highest COVID-19 deaths in the past 24 hours with 1,247, now taking the toll to over 85,000.
The Indian Health Ministry said more than 93,000 people tested positive for the virus in a day, with infection tally crossing 5.3 million. Officials said 30 lawmakers have been found infected with the coronavirus during the ongoing parliament session. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered 858 deaths and nearly 40,000 cases in a day. Brazil's health ministry said the countrywide death toll has surged to nearly 136,000, almost 4.5 million infections. Globally, the virus has claimed over 950,000 lives and infected more than 30 million people so far.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 7 more people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the country's death toll has reached 6,415. The ministry said 645 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said there are 6,572 active infections, while the total confirmed cases have crossed 305,000 mark. The ministry said over 292,000 people have recovered so far. Meanwhile, Perus Congress has failed to remove the country's president, Martin Vizcarra, from office in an impeachment trial. The Congress fell short of the required 87 votes out of 130 to oust the centrist leader on the charges of moral incapacity. The opposition-dominated Congress cast 32 votes in favor of ousting Vizcarra, while there were 78 votes against the measure and 15 abstentions. During his address to the Congress, Vizcarra said the country should not be distracted from the real challenges it faces.
No puede estar detenido. Peru cannot be halted for the content of some audio tapes with no validity. The management of the pandemic and the reopening of the economy cannot be left in suspense. I am convinced that the democratic values of the members of Congress will prevail. It is very serious to have the country plunged into this uncertainty, and therefore I ask for sincere forgiveness before the nation's representatives.
Well, last week, the Congress charged the president with moral incapacity over leaked audio tapes and alleged ties to a little-known singer involved in a fraud case. Now, moving on to Venezuela, which says the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's South American war tour has failed. In a televised speech, President Nicolas Maduro said Pompeo wanted to stir up war against Caracas, but the plan has backfired. Maduro said Caracas will continue on its path to peace, progress and freedom. He said Venezuela's armed forces and Bolivarian militia will be ready to defend peace, territorial integrity and the right of the people to progress.
Una gira electoral buscando votos.
Mike Pompeo, you will continue failing. This is an election tour looking for votes to see if you can bother the region and find votes. It seems like the polls aren't in your favor. They're not in your favor. And they're looking for votes around Venezuela, but Mike Pompeo, Venezuela is on its feet.
Earlier, Pompeo met with Venezuelan migrants in Brazil, calling it a man-made crisis brought by what he called a legitimate Maduro regime. Now, moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump says the pandemic-enforced restrictions on Canada border will be lifted pretty soon. Talking to media, Trump said Washington was looking to get back to normal business with Ottawa. Trump's remarks come just hours after the two countries confirmed the restrictions will remain in place until at least October 21st. Canada's Public Safety Minister Bill Blair confirmed the month-long extension in the border restrictions. The White House is yet to comment on Trump's statement to praise the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement in his remarks.
Well, we're going to see that. We're looking at the border with Canada. Canada would like it opened, and, you know, we want to get back to normal business. We have the USMCA all done, the new trade deal replacing NAFTA, which was probably the worst trade deal ever made by anybody. It was grossly incompetent. We have a great trade deal right now, and so we're going to be opening the borders pretty soon.
Well, the restrictions were first imposed in March and rolled over several times and were due to expire on the 21st of September. Now, the United Nations has agreed to a resolution to step up monitoring of reported rights abuses during Belarus's crackdown on protests. During a debate at the UN Human Rights Council, European ministers denounced the repression of demonstrations since Belarus's August 9 presidential elections. The delegation of Belarus, Russia, China and Venezuela raised procedural objections to a vote on the EU proposal. Russia was there as an observer without voting rights and proposed 17 amendments to the motion, but they were all rejected. The Council, with 23 votes in favour, 2 against and 22 abstentions, agreed to give the UN Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, a mandate to monitor the situation in Belarus. She is to submit an oral report with recommendations by the end of the year. The Belarus Foreign Ministry has termed the vote as a dangerous precedent and accused the Council of meddling in its internal affairs. Meanwhile, the UN agency says eastern Ukraine's protracted conflict is settling down. The conflict has claimed the lives of 14,000 people since violence first broke out in 2014. At a briefing, UN officials Jens Lark said security incidents have dropped by more than half since a ceasefire in late July. He said eastern Ukraine has a sense of normality and people are hoping it will become sustainable. Lark said the calm is remarkable after years of fighting between the Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists. Signed in 2015, the Minsk Agreement was drafted to stop hostilities in eastern Ukraine. Now, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader has died aged 87 from the metastatic pancreas cancer. Flags outside the White House and Supreme Court in the United States Capitol were lowered to half-mast. In a statement, the U.S. Supreme Court said Ginsburg died at her home in Washington. The court said Ginsburg was a champion of women's rights and the court's leading liberal voice. Chief Justice John Roberts said the nation lost a tireless and resolute jurist of historic stature. President Trump said the nation mourns the loss of a titan of the law who inspired all Americans. Trump has already named 2 conservative justices to the court. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden said the winner of the presidential election should choose the Ginsburg's successor. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. Iran has vowed to avenge the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a U.S. missile strike in Iraq earlier this year. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Chief Major General Hossein Salami said Tehran will target anyone involved in the assassination. IRGC Chief Major General Hossein Salami said they promise the revenge is certain and serious. Salami said Washington should know Tehran will target those who were direct or indirectly involved in the incident. In response to the U.S. allegations that Iran might target U.S. envoy, Salami said Iran will never target a female diplomat as revenge. He said Washington's defeat was inevitable and Iran's military is ready to give a crushing response to any slight provocation from Washington. Now moving to Thailand, where clashes broke out between police and protesters at the Thammasat University as demonstrators began rallying in Bangkok. Protesters are demanding the removal of former Junta leader and military-backed Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, a new constitution and elections. Protest leaders are also demanding reforms to curb the power of King Maha Vajiralongkorn's monarchy. Protesters pushed the university gate after minutes of negotiations with a university official. Demonstrations have built in the country since mid-July and the biggest so far drew 10,000 in Bangkok last month. Protest leader Parith Sivarak said he believes as many as 100,000 people to show up, while the police said they expect up to 50,000 to join the protest. Now, in Colombia, 2 police officers have been arrested over a custodial killing that sparked violent protest. Talking to the media, President Iván Duque said the officers had dishonored their uniforms. The prosecutors say the police officers have been fired and are facing charges of homicide and aggravated torture. They said a further 5 officers connected to the custodial death have been suspended. 13 civilians have been killed while hundreds injured in clashes during weeks of protests. On the 9th of September, police had repeatedly shot Javier Ordonez with a stun gun, who died in a hospital later. Now, Libya's renegade commander Khalifa Haftar says he will lift his blockade of oil outputs for a month. The blockade by Eastern forces has cost Libya $9 billion of loss in revenue so far this year. In a statement, Haftar said he has agreed with the rival Tripoli government on a fair distribution of energy revenue. Following the announcement, a Tripoli-based government official also said it has been decided to resume oil production. GNA's Deputy Prime Minister Ahmed Maiteeg said this will involve a new committee to oversee revenue distribution. He said the committee will coordinate to prepare a budget and transfer funds to cover payments and deal with the public debt. But the country's National Oil Corporation said it will not lift force majeure restrictions on exports until oil facilities are demilitarized. Moving on, Tokyo says it will send investigators to Mauritius to look into the cause of a huge oil spill from a vessel chartered by a Japanese firm. In a statement, the government said the Transport Safety Board will send a 5-member team to the island nation on the 20th of September. It said the team will carry out a 2-week investigation into the Panama-flagged bulk carrier Wakashio. The statement read the probe will begin after a 2-week quarantine to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. The dispatch of investigators is the first by the board for an accident caused by a foreign registered vessel in territorial waters of another country. Authorities of Mauritius and Panama said they plan to join the investigation. Now, thundershowers bring relief to the fire-ravaged U.S. state of Oregon. Rain helps a force of more than 6,000 firefighters making a further headway against 10 major blazes still burning in the state. Officials said they are making steady progress suppressing the fires. Meanwhile, California Fire Department said milder weather is helping the firefight as crews continue to gain ground on many of the major incidents. Several homes were destroyed by the unrelenting wildfire in California that reached a Mojave Desert community. Thousands of evacuees, particularly in Oregon, remained huddled in emergency shelters, mobile trailers and hotel rooms. Now, a rare hurricane-like storm known as Medicane is lashing islands in the western Greece, bringing torrential rains and power cuts. Such cyclones first appeared in Greece in 1995 and have become more frequent in recent years. Authorities say the storm Lanos is moving eastwards, bringing winds of nearly 120 kilometers per hour. They say Lanos is set to hit the Peloponnese, Athens and Crete. There are reports of flooded streets and transport disruption on the islands of Cephalonia, Zakynthos and Ithaca. The authorities have declared a state of emergency there. The authorities say the intensity and course of the cyclone could not be accurately predicted. Moving on, thousands of refugees have been left without shelter with nowhere to go after a fire in an overcrowded refugee camp in Moria. Amid the misery, an Afghan artist is bringing the refugees' charred ruins of Moria camps on his canvas. More in this report.
Flames engulfed Moria migrants' camp, forcing thousands of people to flee. They are now forced to sleep in the street without proper shelter, sanitation, food or water. An Afghan refugee, Ahmed Shukran Shehzad, witnessed the sufferings, and being an artist, he found a way to express the pain and hardship migrants faced. He has picked up a brush and depicted the charred ruins of Moria camp on his canvas.
People were awake night and day. Children were uncomfortable. Women were uncomfortable. People that are in need, pregnant women, it was difficult for them to live there also.
Shehzad used to teach art lessons to refugee children before the tragedy hit them. Through his art, he wants to divert the world's attention to the troubles of migrants living in a makeshift camp.
I myself suffered greatly in this way, and I wanted to imagine such a scene in my mind and draw it so that people around the world could see and understand, feel something inside and realize that migrants, whether they are Somali, Afghan, Arab, Congolese, African, they are all facing the same difficulties. They should all be felt compassion for, and they should all be assisted.
The inferno has razed most of Moria to the ground along with many of the migrants' personal belongings. Greece government has been moving the migrants to a new temporary tent camp being referred to as a Karatepe.
With that, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.